Nikki and Ted had a lot in common. They were both ambitious, driven, and hardworking. They'd both done well in school, and after graduating, they'd each joined the army. They both spent a few years moving around with the military before settling down into regular civilian jobs. So they could relate to each other on a lot of levels. They'd been through similar stages in life, and they had plenty to talk about. There were a few differences, though. For one, Ted was a father. He'd been married before, divorced now, and had a son from that relationship. But he didn't seem to be very involved in his son's life. The boy lived with his mother, and Theodore just paid child support. As for distance, he lived about 30 to 45 minutes away from Nikki, in Columbia, while Nikki lived in Charlotte. So they'd often spend weekends together, having sleepovers, and Nikki was clearly head over heels. Even though she was usually private, her feelings showed. She just couldn't hide it. But as the months went by, the way Nikki talked about the relationship started to shift. That excitement, that lightness in her voice just kind of faded. She didn't sound as happy or bubbly anymore. Instead, she began pointing out more and more things that bothered her about Ted. They've been arguing a lot lately. The biggest issue between them was pretty clear. He just wouldn't commit. At this point, their situation was more like a friends with benefits kind of thing. They were seeing each other regularly, staying over at each other's places, but there were no labels, no exclusivity. And even though Nikki was playing it cool on the outside, it was obvious that she wanted more. She had real feelings for this guy. She wanted a real relationship. She even talked about maybe one day being his wife. But Ted wasn't interested in any of that. In fact, Nikki wasn't even the only woman he was seeing. He had other girls, other flings. He didn't really try to hide it either. It's not like he was sneaking around or lying to Nikki. He was upfront from the start. No strings attached, no relationship, just casual. And for a while, Nikki went along with it. Maybe she thought it would change, or maybe she just liked him enough to stick around despite it. But as time went on and her feelings grew deeper, she started pushing for something more serious. She asked if they could make it official, be exclusive, cut the other girls off. And every single time, Ted would shut down. He told her flat out, he wasn't interested in anything more. That rejection, again and again, just kept leading to arguments. It was wearing her down. By May of 2009, so around 3 months after they'd first started seeing each other, Nikki had finally had enough. She told her sister Latoya that she couldn't do it anymore, that she needed to break things off for good. She was planning one last trip to Ted's place in Columbia. The whole point was to go pick up the stuff she'd left at his house. That was it. This was going to be the last time she saw him. She was ready to walk away for real this time, and it properly, focus on herself, and find someone who actually wanted to be with her seriously. And honestly, it kind of seemed like they'd already broken up by this point, maybe over the phone or through a text. The vibe was already off. She wasn't going there to argue or try one last time. It was just about closure. One last visit, grab her things, and move on. So on May 6th, 2009, Nikki McFadder made the drive from Charlotte to Columbia for what was supposed to be the last time. She was done. She was ready to cut this man out of her life for good. She actually left a little earlier in the day because she had a shift at the airport later that evening, so she needed to be back in time for that. Just before noon, around 11:45, she texted a friend to say she was on her way to his house. That would turn out to be the very last time anyone ever heard from Nikki. Later that day, she never showed up for her shift at the airport. And over the next few days, when her friends and family tried to get in touch with her, they got nothing. No texts, no calls, no replies at all. Now, at first, this wasn't a massive red flag. Nikki was a bit of a free spirit, kind of adventurous, unpredictable. She had a wild side. Sometimes she'd just take off for a bit, do her own thing. Her sister even thought maybe she just decided to leave town for a couple of days. That wasn't totally out of character for her. She was one of those people who liked to keep life exciting, you know? But after a few days with no contact at all, not even a single text, that's when things started to feel off. Yeah, Nikki might have gone off on little adventures, but she always called back. She always texted her sister. She loved her family and kept in close contact with them. So the silence? That wasn't like her. Not at all. Eventually, 5 days passed with no sign of Nikki. No messages, no calls, no appearances, and her friends and family decided it was time to go to the police. They officially reported her missing, and just like that, a full investigation got underway. Police took it seriously straight away. Her loved ones didn't wait around either. They jumped into action. They were printing out missing posters, putting them up all over town, talking to people, asking around, just doing everything they could to find her. What's really interesting is that police immediately suspected foul play. Even though Nikki had that adventurous streak, and yeah, you could say disappearing for a few days wasn't completely out of character, the situation just didn't sit right. She was in the middle of a normal day. She had work that evening, and not just any job. She took it seriously. She had perfect attendance, never missed a shift. And even if she had to miss a shift for whatever reason, she absolutely would have called in and let someone know. But she didn't. No call, no text, nothing. She hadn't touched her phone in days. And from where the police were standing, it was becoming more and more clear this didn't look good. The chances of finding Nikki alive were starting to seem very, very low. Of course, police started interviewing all of Nikki's friends and family to get a better picture of her life. And as soon as they heard she'd been dating some guy she met online, and that things had started to go south, and that she'd gone to break up with him that day. Yeah, police were immediately like, okay, well, obvious suspect. So at that point, the prime suspect in Nikki's disappearance became Theodore Manning. They managed to figure out his name, probably by looking through Nikki's accounts or something, since, remember, she never really told her family who he was. Once they had his name and address, they went down to his house to talk to him. Straight away, he denied everything. He told them he had no idea where Nikki was, said he hadn't heard from her in over a week, and insisted they weren't even serious. He told police they weren't boyfriend and girlfriend, they were just kind of casually seeing each other, just sleeping together. He even admitted to police that he had multiple other girlfriends and side chicks he was seeing at the same time, so Nikki wasn't anything exclusive, which was news to her family, because from their side, it really seemed like Nikki had a proper boyfriend. That's how she'd spoken about him. They had no idea she was involved with a guy who was also dating like 5 or 6 other women. So yeah, he had to come clean about that. He told police, look, I got a lot of girlfriends, basically. And police ended up with a ton of evidence to back that up too, because they seized his phone when they arrested him, and when they looked through the records, yeah, there it was. He was texting, calling, messaging all kinds of women. It was kind of wild. Naturally, police thought it might be helpful to talk to some of these other women. I mean, they were close to Ted Manning, right? Maybe one of them had seen something or heard something. Maybe they could shed some light. So police interviewed a few of them, and one woman in particular stood out. Someone named Kendra Goodman, one of his girlfriends. Turns out, Ted had actually called Kendra the very same evening that Nikki went missing. So, of course, the police were really interested to hear what he'd said to her. So police had all of Kendra's details, her phone number, her home address. So they started trying to get in touch with her. They called her a few times, left messages trying to get her to come in for an interview, but she was dodging every single call. They called multiple times, and she just wouldn't pick up. So eventually, they decided to go to her house. They knocked on her door. Nothing. She didn't answer. She was clearly avoiding them. This all happened over the course of a few days. While they were still trying to reach Kendra, police also got access to Nikki McFadder's bank records. And what they found was not encouraging. Her account had been completely inactive since the day she was last heard from. And that's never a good sign. If someone's not using their card, no withdrawals, no shopping, not even buying food or water, it usually means something's very wrong. It usually means they're probably not alive. There was actually just one transaction on the day Nikki went missing. Her card was used at an ATM to withdraw a few $100s in cash. That caught police attention. They decided to look into that a little more closely, but we'll come back to that in a bit. Just hold on to that detail for now. So yeah, while all that's going on, they're still trying to contact Kendra Goodman, and she's still dodging them for days. Then finally, she picks up the phone, and when she does, she's got a wild story to tell. She tells police that on the day Nikki disappeared, Ted had called her, and he was being kind of flirty on the phone, asking what she was doing. She told him she was just out driving around, and he said something like, "Don't waste gas, come over here instead." So she did. She drove over to his place. When she got there, Kendra said he was out on the driveway, working on a car. He told her it belonged to a friend. He was just fixing it up. It was a black Honda, and Kendra remembered it pretty clearly. She even commented that it was a nice-looking car, especially the rims. They really stood out. And then Ted said something weird. He turned to her and was like, "Hey, do you think those rims would fit your car?" Like he was offering them to her, which was strange. They were supposedly his friend's rims, right? Kendra thought it was a bit odd, but for whatever reason, she didn't take him up on it. They just kept chatting while he worked on the car, and eventually he finished up. And then Ted asked Kendra for a little favor. He wanted her to follow him in her car while he drove his friend's car so he could drop it off. Then she could give him a ride back home. It wasn't a huge ask, and this was her boyfriend after all. Well, okay, not officially. Ted didn't seem to be official with any of his girlfriends, but still, she was one of them. So she agreed. So the two of them set off. Ted was in the black Honda, and Kendra followed behind in her own car. They started driving, and pretty soon they were out in the middle of nowhere. Kendra had no idea where they were going. Then suddenly, Ted pulled into a church parking lot. So Kendra pulled in right behind him. He got out of the car and came over to her, sat down in her passenger seat, and explained the plan. He was going to take the car down the road to meet his friend, hand it over, sort everything out, and then walk back here and meet her. Then she could drive him home. Sounded simple enough. So Kendra waited in her car and watched Ted drive off in the Honda. She saw him drive down the road a bit, then turn onto a dirt path, and then he was gone. Out of sight. She waited, and waited, and waited some more. Hours went by. Finally, Ted came walking back to her car. And the second he opened the door, she noticed something strange. He smelled really strongly of gasoline. Like it hit her the moment he sat down. That wasn't how he smelled earlier. Something about that just didn't sit right. Especially because while he'd been gone, Kendra remembered hearing a loud bang off in the distance. At the time, she didn't think much of it. Sometimes you hear a loud noise and just move on. But now, putting two and two together, it felt different. They were out in the middle of nowhere. Ted disappears for hours, comes back reeking of gasoline. And there was that loud bang. She couldn't help but wonder, what was he doing down that dirt track? So she asked him, point blank, why he smelled so much like gas. And Ted was like, "Oh yeah, me and my friend decided to burn a bunch of junk from our cars. Had a little bonfire. Super casual. No big deal." The explanation was vague, didn't make a ton of sense. But for whatever reason, Kendra let it go. She didn't press. She just got behind the wheel and they drove home. So yeah, after that day, Kendra and Ted just went back to their usual routines. A few days passed and she didn't really hear from him much. Nothing unusual, until suddenly she had the police knocking on her door asking questions about him. And from the way they were talking, it started to seem like Kendra herself might be involved somehow. But the police didn't buy her story completely. Something about it just didn't sit right. I mean, the whole thing with Ted coming back smelling like gasoline after disappearing for hours, the random loud bang in the distance, and Kendra just driving him home without asking too many questions, it didn't add up. There were plot holes, clearly. Why wasn't she more curious about where he'd been? Why did she just accept the bonfire excuse and move on? It felt like she was brushing too much under the rug. And during questioning, Kendra let a few things slip, enough to make detectives feel like she wasn't telling the full truth. It became obvious she was holding some things back. Maybe not lying outright at first, but definitely keeping details to herself. One of the things she said was that she had no idea who Nikki McFadder even was. She claimed she didn't know anything about the missing person case, had never heard of Nikki before the police started asking about her. But later in that same interview, she slipped up and said that she knew the black Honda, the one Ted was working on, was Nikki's car. So wait, you don't know Nikki, you don't know anything about this missing woman, but somehow you knew that the black Honda belonged to her? That didn't make any sense. And it wasn't the only inconsistency. Little things like that kept piling up in her statements, and the police grew more and more suspicious. Their working theory at the time was that maybe Kendra had killed Nikki herself out of jealousy. Maybe she found out about Ted seeing multiple women and she didn't take it well. Maybe she decided to take one of them out. That was the direction investigators were leaning. So they went back to Kendra and asked if she'd be willing to take a polygraph test just to clear her name and get to the truth. And she agreed. But Kendra failed the lie detector test. It showed she'd been lying in all of her previous interviews. So when the police confronted her with that, showed her the results, and pressed her for the truth, eventually, Kendra broke down and confessed. She agreed to take police to the spot where she'd been waiting in her car that day, where Ted had disappeared for a couple of hours. It was the dirt road just off that church parking lot. And when the police got there, they didn't have to look very far. Right near the entrance of the dirt track, they immediately spotted a completely burnt-out car. This thing was torched. The rims were melted. The entire shell of the car was blackened. It wasn't just a small fire. Whoever did this had set the whole thing ablaze. Police went over to get a closer look, and when they checked inside, things got even darker. In the boot of that car, they found human remains, burned so badly that there was almost nothing left, just bone fragments. It was clear someone had tried to destroy the evidence completely. At this point, investigators had a rough idea of what had happened, but there were still huge questions. Was the person inside the car alive when the fire started? Or had they already been killed and then set on fire to cover it up? Those answers came pretty quickly once the remains were sent for analysis. The medical examiner found a bullet hole in the back of the skull. So no, this person had already been murdered. They'd been shot, and the fire was a cover-up. Of course, police strongly suspected the body was Nikki McFadder, but it wasn't that straightforward. The remains were so badly damaged, they couldn't confirm it right away. They were unrecognizable. So the body was sent to the morgue, and eventually, the identification was made through dental records. And yes, it was Nikki. That confirmation absolutely devastated her family. There was barely anything left of her. When they received her remains back, it all fit into a tiny box. And I couldn't believe it. That small box was all that was left of Nikki, this woman who was their daughter, their sister, their friend. It was surreal. How could this tiny box hold someone who had been so full of life? Her family was just heartbroken. It didn't feel real. But at least now they had proof. It was clear she had been murdered, and police already knew exactly who was responsible. On the same day that the remains were officially identified, police moved in and arrested Theodore Manning on suspicion of Nikki McFadder's murder. So they wanted to start building their case properly against this guy, and the most obvious first step was to get a search warrant for his house. That was, after all, where Nikki had gone that day. She was heading there to break things off with him, to pick up her stuff. So maybe, just maybe, that's where he killed her. And if that was the case, there had to be evidence. And police were right. Inside Theodore Manning's bedroom, on one of the white walls, there was red blood spatter, just up the wall, clear as day. He hadn't even tried to clean it up or hide it. It was just there, obvious. And when police tested it, the blood came back as a match to Nikki McFadder. It looked like she'd been shot right there in Ted's bedroom. And then her body had been stuffed into the boot of her own car, driven out into the middle of nowhere, and set on fire. Police continued searching the house, hoping to find the weapon he used, but there were no guns anywhere. Still, that blood spatter was solid. It was strong evidence. Even without the murder weapon, they had a case. But then they found something else, a great piece of supporting evidence. Remember that ATM withdrawal on the day Nikki went missing? Her bank card was used to pull out cash. Well, police pulled the CCTV footage from that ATM. And who do you think it was? Theodore Manning. Of course it was him. And not just that, Kendra Goodman was there too. Both of them were also spotted on CCTV at a local supermarket buying just one item, bleach. It wasn't part of a bigger shopping trip. They didn't buy groceries or other cleaning supplies. Just bleach, which obviously raised more red flags. Bleach to clean up a crime scene, maybe? And to top it off, police even found the receipt for that bleach inside Ted's house. So now, everything was connecting, layer after layer of damning evidence piling up against him. It was looking like a pretty straightforward case. But still, the question that haunted investigators and Nikki's family was why? Why did he kill her? From everything they knew, he didn't even want to be in a relationship with Nikki. He wasn't interested in commitment. So why would he be angry that she was trying to leave? Some people theorized that maybe she went there to break up with him and something about that set him off. But again, that didn't make much sense. He was the one keeping things casual. Why would he care? What most people think happened is that once Nikki got there, an argument broke out. Maybe something was said that pushed him over the edge, and in the heat of the moment, he snapped. He grabbed a gun, and he shot her. That seems to be the most likely scenario. Well, we do have a version of events from Theodore Manning. Now, whether or not we believe his version of what happened, that's a whole different thing. But yeah, now that he'd been officially charged with murder, he finally realized that there wasn't really a way for him to lie his way out of this one. Oh, don't worry, he definitely tried. But in the end, he had to give police some kind of explanation. So he told them a story. And whether that story is even remotely true, I don't know. But I'll tell you what he told them. According to Theodore, that day started just like all the other times Nikki came over. They ended up having the same argument they'd had countless times before. Nikki, once again, told him that she wanted to be with him properly, exclusively. She wanted to be his only girlfriend. She wanted him to drop all the other women he had in his life. And as always, he told her no. He said he wasn't going to do that. He had told her this from the start. He wasn't going to commit, and he wasn't going to cut anyone off just for her. And apparently, this argument just kept dragging on. Theodore said Nikki wouldn't let it go this time. Normally, she'd back off after a bit, and they'd end up making up or whatever. But not this time. She was getting more and more upset. According to him, she started raising her voice, started yelling, standing up, waving her arms around, and at one point, pushing him. Then he said something really specific. He said that at one point during the argument, Nikki turned around and went for a bag that was on the floor. Inside that bag, he claimed, was a loaded handgun, and supposedly, Nikki knew the gun was in there. He said she reached straight in, pulled the gun out, and aimed it at him. Now, according to Theodore, at this point, he feared for his life. He knew the gun was loaded, and so he said he immediately jumped up and tried to wrestle it away from her. He claimed they struggled for a while, just going back and forth over this gun, until suddenly it went off, and Nikki collapsed to the ground. He told police that Nikki McFadder had been shot accidentally in the back of the head during a struggle over the weapon. That was his story. Now, I don't know about you, but that has got to be one of the most unbelievable cover stories I've ever heard in my life. With this version of events, Ted was basically trying to paint it like the whole thing was Nikki's fault. In his story, he was the victim. He was just acting in self-defense. The shooting was an accident, and it all happened because she picked up the gun first. If you think about it, it's kind of the perfect cover story, if anyone actually believed it. But of course, no one did. It wasn't even slightly believable. I mean, first of all, Nikki went over there that day to break up with him. She wasn't trying to continue the relationship. She wasn't there begging or screaming or fighting to be with him. She was done. She was going there to pick up her stuff and walk away. So the idea that she'd suddenly lose control and start waving a gun at him just didn't make sense. And the biggest red flag in his entire story? The bullet hole. It was in the back of her skull. Like, how does that happen in a struggle? If they were genuinely wrestling over the gun and it went off by accident, then maybe she'd get shot in the arm or the leg or even the chest. But the back of the head? That's not something that just happens by accident. That looks like someone aimed and pulled the trigger. There's no way it could have been a struggle. It's just not physically plausible. And then there's the most obvious question of all. If it really had been an accident, if Ted was really just trying to defend himself and the gun went off, then why didn't he call for help? Why didn't he try to save her? If it was a mistake, if it wasn't murder, then why was his first reaction to cover it up? He didn't call 911. He didn't try to get her help. He didn't even pause. He just immediately decided to dispose of the body. He dumped her in the trunk of her own car, drove it out to the middle of nowhere, and set it on fire. That's not what someone innocent does. That's what someone guilty does. And police were also becoming more and more suspicious of Kendra Goodman. Not that she had helped kill Nikki, but that she was way more involved in the cover-up than she was letting on. From the beginning, Kendra had been saying she had no idea there was a body in the car. She didn't know who Nikki was. She just helped Ted because he said he was dropping a car off. She claimed she was totally in the dark about everything, but the police didn't believe her. They were pretty convinced that she knew exactly what was going on. They believed that she knew there was a body in that car. That when she followed Ted out to the woods, It wasn't some casual favor. She was helping him get rid of a body. She drove him out there, waited while he burned the evidence, and then gave him a lift home like nothing had happened. Police didn't buy her whole innocent act. They thought Kendra was fully aware and willingly helped cover up a murder. Police could actually tell. And this is a really grim little detail. So brace yourself. But forensic investigators were able to determine something about the crime scene in Ted's bedroom. You remember, that was where they found all the blood spatter on the wall, and it's where they believed Nikki was killed. Well, the forensic analysis showed that after Nikki had died, Theodore Manning and Kendra Goodman had gone back into that room and had sex in the same room, with blood still on the walls. And Kendra was still claiming she had no idea who Nikki was, no clue what had happened. But seriously, what do you mean? You go to your boyfriend's house, there's blood everywhere in the bedroom, and you're not asking any questions? You just go along with it like that's normal? But that's not even the worst part. It gets even worse for Kendra, because either that same day, or maybe the very next one, Ted handed her a wad of cash, like hundreds of dollars in cash. About $800. And she didn't question it. Not once. Police were sure that this money came from Nikki's bank card, from that ATM withdrawal we mentioned earlier. So basically, this was Nikki's money. But Kendra didn't care. She didn't ask where it came from. She just took it. And honestly, police believed she knew exactly where that money had come from, and she chose to stay quiet. So with all of that stacked against her, police decided to charge Kendra Goodman with being an accessory to murder. And then came the trials. Now, the trial of Ted Manning? Yeah, this is where you're going to get mad. Seriously, it's frustrating beyond belief. So, of course, his defense team didn't want him going down for murder. No defense team ever does. They were aiming for a lesser charge, something like manslaughter. And the angle they were going for was based on that same story Ted had already told, that he and Nikki got into a heated argument, she pulled a gun on him, he wrestled it away, and it accidentally discharged. If that version was true, then yeah, technically it would be manslaughter because there wasn't any premeditation, no intent to kill. But come on, we know that story doesn't hold up. And yet, it worked. It actually worked. The jury somehow bought it. They believed that Nikki pulled the gun first and that Ted shot her by accident, even though she was shot in the back of the head, even though everything about the evidence pointed to it being a deliberate act. The jury agreed with the manslaughter argument. So in the end, Theodore Manning was found guilty, but not of murder. He was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 30 years in prison for Nikki's death. And everyone, the police, the investigators, Nikki's family, they were absolutely furious. I mean, it was so obviously murder. He practically got away with it, and there was nothing anyone could do to change the verdict. As for Kendra Goodman, she was found guilty of being an accessory to murder, and she was sentenced to 2 years in prison for her role in the cover-up.